The Feast of the Seven Fishes is a cherished Italian-American tradition that's celebrated on Christmas Eve. But to be honest, it's not a tradition that I ever celebrated. My family always hosted Christmas Day, so Christmas Eve, we're always working. But even if we did, the idea of serving 7 dishes, whether it's a small party or a large one, just seems like a lot. But if you celebrate the feast and you don't have a huge gathering on Christmas Eve, or you're not hosting Christmas Day and you want to do something fun the night before, I think you're really gonna love my Feast of the Seven Fishes in 3 dishes. The simplest and most practical way to celebrate the Feast of the Seven Fishes without going crazy. I want to thank our sponsor today, Made In, but more on them later. For now, let's just jump right into it. Now first, let's pretend it is the eve of Christmas Eve. Everything's still open on Christmas Eve, so if you wanted to shop the day of, you certainly can, but the crowds are gonna be wild and I like to avoid the crowds. So the day before Christmas Eve, I gotta do 2 main things. I gotta shop and I gotta start to prepare our first course, the antipasti course, which is gonna be a play on spicy tuna and crispy rice. We're gonna do a spicy Calabrian chili tuna and salmon on a crispy arancini. So after hitting the market to get everything else, I go to my fish specialist to get the real goods, the 7 fishes. Now, why 7 fishes on Christmas Eve? The whole origin of the 7 fishes dates back to the Roman Catholic tradition of fasting from meat and animal fat on Christmas Eve and the wait for the feast on Christmas Day. The tradition came from southern Italy, where it's known as the Vigil, celebrating the wait until midnight, the birth of Jesus. And then you got whole Bronzino. I get it scaled and gutted. In Italy, however, the celebration exists, but the idea of 7 fishes doesn't. That is something that was developed in America. I'll do 8 of the extra large shrimp. Possibly from the 7 sacraments. Maybe it's because of a lucky number. But if you celebrate it in your family, you know it's a big deal, so I'm excited to make it for the first time. I'll do a half pound of the dry scallops. And let's do a thing of mussels. Maybe 10 clams. All the little neck clams.
Yes, no.
7 fishes. He knows. You know he gets jammed up every year. $97 is the damage, which is not bad. For feeding about 4 or 5 people, it's about $25 a person in seafood. Now we've got the fish secured and back home. We're not gonna cook them right away. We need to take care of them and store them properly. First thing we're gonna do is get the clams and the mussels in some water. Just wanna purge them of any of that grit inside and also clean the exterior of the shell. Now mussels usually come in these little packets, so I think there's more than about 15 in here, probably around 30. If they don't come in the packets, I usually go 15 mussels, 15 clams, but I got about 10 clams because I got this bag right here. And there you go. And when it comes to mussels, what you got to do is go through. Some you'll find they'll be nice and clean, nothing to pull out, but others have a beard and you've got to remove that beard. You just kind of grab it and pull it out. And I'll just do that. Go through, make sure you remove the beard of all the mussels. Now, if you see one of these that's open and will not close when you pinch it, that's a sign that it's dead. You got to toss that guy. And we'll get all those out. That water should be filthy, so we'll dump it, get some fresh water in, get them back into the water, and hit them with some salt, and that salt should open them up, and any grit that's inside should fall to the bottom of the bowl. We'll let those soak while we handle the rest of the seafood. Now, the scallops come connected to this like connective tissue, which I believe is the muscle that opens and closes the shell. And it's very tough and chewy, and we need to remove it. So you just pull it off the side of the scallop, get them on some paper towel, get them nice and dry. Get the shrimp out, get those nice and dry. Seafood just needs to be kept nice and dry. That'll keep it fresher longer. Then we're gonna dry up the Bronzino, and we've got our 7 fishes ready to go. Get everything wrapped in plastic and on a sheet tray that's lifted up with a wire rack. I'm gonna grind up some ice in a blender, pour that shredded ice right on top of the wire rack, and then I can place the wrapped Bronzino, the wrapped tuna right on the ice, and then I'm gonna take a sheet, place it over the ice, then place the scallops and the shrimp there, cover it, and that'll go in the fridge. Then we're gonna take the mussels and the clams, get them out of that water they've been soaking in, and then put them in a strainer, and then cover them with some more ice, and then into the fridge. Now what I'm gonna do here is a little trick I learned from Chef John, which is how to quickly cure salmon in about 3 minutes. First, we're gonna need about 2.5 cups of cold, fresh water. And to that, I'm gonna add a 1/2 cup of kosher salt and 1/3 cup of granulated sugar. And I'm gonna whisk that until the salt and sugar is dissolved and the water's clear. Then we can cut the salmon. There's a little white sinew that runs down the middle of the salmon. I'm gonna take my knife on either side of that and cut down to the skin. And then turn my knife and then begin slowly moving back and forth, cutting along the skin, but with the knife slightly facing down the cutting board. And you should get a really clean cut along the skin with no meat left over. Do the same to the other side. Then there's like this little brown part of the salmon. I'm just gonna take my knife and clean that up. We're not cooking this, so I don't want any of that brown to muddy up the final color of the spicy salmon. And then you wanna go ahead and slice 1/4-inch slices in somewhat of a sashimi style. Then we're gonna take those little pieces, we're gonna add them to the brine. We're gonna set a timer for 3 minutes and let those soak for 3 minutes. After that 3 minutes, we wanna get them onto a paper towel, let them dry, then onto a plate. We can wrap that plate in plastic wrap and we can get it in the fridge. Some fish like tuna are a little bit more resilient to bacteria, which is why we don't need to do this step, but with salmon, it's always nice to cure it first before eating it raw. Now everything's cleaned, everything's prepared, everything's in their fridge chilling. Even if you pick this up on Christmas Eve, you'd still have to clean the clams, cure the salmon, and do all that stuff. But the one thing you kind of have to make beforehand is the risotto. Like I said, the first course is going to take that tuna and that salmon, and we're gonna make like a spicy tuna and spicy salmon out of it. But instead of using like a sriracha, we're gonna use Calabrian chili. And it's a play on the spicy tuna and sushi rice. So instead of the sushi rice, we're gonna make arancini in the same style. So I need a cup of arborio, carnaroli, or violoni nano. These are all great risotto rices. Although carnaroli and violoni nano, those are probably just a little bit better than arborio. And so we're probably going to be making the simplest risotto you can make. I'm using risotto, water instead of stock. We're designing this specifically for arancini. So we don't need the stock. We can just use water. We could save a little bit of money. And I'm gonna use some wine. I have some wine on hand. This is one of my favorite affordable wines. It's about 12 bucks and it's really great. It's a Chenin Blanc and a Viognier grape. It's a really nice wine. So I just need about a cup of it, cup and a half. You don't even need the wine, but the wine just adds a little bit more flavor. And at the end, we're just adding a little bit of butter and a little bit of Parmigiano Reggiano, and that's it. So I'm gonna get that water into a pot and I'm gonna bring that up to a simmer. We need that water to be nice and warm. Then off to the side, I'm gonna get a high rimmed pan. I have this saucier. I'm gonna put that on about medium high heat. And once it's hot, I'm gonna coat the bottom of the pan with some olive oil and then I'm gonna toss the rice right into it and I'm gonna begin to toast it. Once it begins to smell fragrant and nutty, then I'm gonna deglaze it with that white wine. I only need about a cup and a half. And then once I add the wine, I wanna reduce that wine by about half. And then I can go ahead and add in the water 1 ladle at a time. And we've made risotto on this channel many times before, and I've been very specific about it. You know the process. We're gonna add a ladle of liquid at a time. We're gonna stir, agitate that rice, bust out the starch in each rice kernel. And we're gonna repeat that for about 25-30 minutes. And this is more or less the same exact process until we get up into the end. So after about 30 minutes, I want to start to taste the rice for doneness. It's almost there. I'm going to season it with some salt because there is no seasoning in it, so pretty generously. And then I'm going to continue to start tasting it till I find that the rice is cooked through and is no longer sticking to my teeth. Now I'm usually looking for a final product closer to a consistency like this. But for this, I want to mold it into a specific shape. So I want this to be a lot tighter than I would normally serve an actual risotto. So once I give it a taste and can tell it's perfectly cooked, I just want to lower the heat because it's nice and thick. And I just want to cook it until that moisture sort of gets absorbed and dries out a bit. And I can tell when I attempt to toss the risotto in a pan, it's not really flowing. It's kind of staying tight, which is not what you want for a regular risotto, but it is what you want for this recipe. Once it's there, I'm going to kill the heat. I'm going to mix in about 2 tablespoons of cold butter. That'll cool the mixture down. Then I'm gonna get it off the heat and finish it with some parm. So now we got a nice tight risotto off the heat. Now that's cooled a little bit. About a 1/4 cup, maybe a 1/2 cup of Parmigiano Reggiano. And I want that to tighten it up a little bit, help it bind it. And then I can just see how it's behaving. Check it one more time for seasoning. Now, while I was cooking that, I had a small sheet tray in the freezer chilling, which is gonna help chill this risotto down faster. Then I'm just gonna get some plastic wrap, make sure it's flush against the walls, and then add the risotto. Now I forgot, usually I mold this on a 1/4 sheet tray, but I used a 1/2 sheet tray. So I'm gonna use half of that 1/2 sheet tray to mold the risotto. And I'm just gonna wrap it up and I'm gonna toss that into the fridge to set overnight. And now what we just did was make our lives very easy to throw together a really classy, a really delicious, a really impressive 7 fishes in 3 dishes. We'll come back tomorrow and throw it all together. Now here we are, it's Christmas Eve and we're ready to cook. And in order to host the Feast of the 7 Fishes, or to just be a person who generally likes to entertain, you're gonna need yourself some good pots and pans. That's why I'm happy to be sponsored today by our friends over at Made In, who are one of our favorite sponsors. And since it's the holidays, today they're gonna be saving you money on some much needed gear. Made In stainless steel pans are crafted in Italy and used by professional chefs in the world's best kitchens. Made of a premium 5-ply stainless steel material is what sets it apart from other pans out there. The 5 layers allow for superior heat retention, even heating, and ease of heat control. The handles are designed to stay cool while cooking and are ergonomic so they feel good in the hand. And for me, when I'm selecting pots and pans, especially pans, the handle is like 70% of the decision. I need it to feel good in my hand. If it's rounded, you pulling it out of the oven makes it a little wobbly. Having it squared off gives you support. And the curvature of the walls is calculated for deeper searing and easier flipping, while the rolled rims allow you to pour sauces out without spilling. So if you need to gear up yourself, or you're like me and you're gonna get all your friends and family Made In gear for Christmas, Made In's offering my viewers 10% off using my link down in the description. So thank you, Made In, for being such a great sponsor all year long. And let's get back into the recipe. So now, like I said, the first thing we need to get started on today is making the spicy tuna and the spicy salmon. So we have that ready to go. So as you can see, I changed out that ice one more time before I went to sleep, and it is now melted. But because we have that piece of plastic protecting the fish, everything stayed nice and dry, wasn't sitting in a pool of moisture, and because we were having it lifted up, everything's nice. So for now, I just need my tuna, and I'm just gonna drain that water, get it back in the fridge. And then we've got our salmon. Firmed up a bit, it's brightened in color. It's nicely cured. So we've got our nice piece of tuna right here. And that first thing I'm gonna do is, see how the grains run that way? I'm gonna start to cut slices across the grain. Whenever you cut fish, you wanna just use long strokes with the knife. And we just wanna cut about 1/4-inch slices of the tuna. Then we wanna take those slices and cut those into little thin strips, and then turn those and chop them into really fine dices. Once you've gotten them all chopped, just run your knife through the entire mixture and just mince it into a fine mince. Same goes for the salmon. And get them both in a bowl. First thing, I'm gonna salt each one, then in with some QP mayo, maybe about 2 tablespoons in each bowl. You always add a little bit more if needed, but you can't take it away. And we do not want them too mayo-y. And then about a teaspoon of the chopped Calabrian chilies into each one. You know, maybe like that much. And then totally optional, I'm gonna do a little bit of lemon zest. Just a couple of grinds on each one. So we basically just need enough mayo to bind the mixture. And so after mixing it, I can tell I need a little bit more mayo, and I just kind of want to get it so that it can form a little glob like this. Same with the salmon, but the salmon's got a little bit more moisture, so I just want to be a little bit more careful. So I may want to add just a little less mayo. Once they're nice homogeneous mixes, we're gonna add them to piping bags, tie them up, and then we're gonna store them in the refrigerator until we're ready to use them. And for the garnish for these, we're gonna need some scallions, so I'm just gonna slice some scallions up really thin and save those for later when we're ready to serve. There's a few other things for the other dishes we need to start to prepare. The idea was an antipasti, which is what the spicy tuna and salmon is. Then you got the primi, or the pasta course, which is going to be a bucatini with like a seafood sauce. So we're gonna use the clams, the mussels, the shrimp, and the scallops. And then after that, for the segundi course, or the main fish course, it's gonna be a salt-baked branzino. And we're gonna serve that with some beautiful, simple sauteed spinach. So first I wanna make sure I get that spinach washed. Now again, just like I mentioned last episode, I prefer using this large leaf spinach as opposed to the baby spinach you get in those little clam shells. The quality and flavor is just incomparable. However, they are dirty, so we always have to wash them. We'll let that soak, and then we can prepare the scallops and the shrimp. First thing is I want to take the scallops. These are rather big scallops. I want to just cut them into bite-sized pieces, but this looks a little big. So I'm gonna just take these big guys and quarter them. You just want something like that, a nice bite size that's gonna fit nicely on a fork. If they're a little smaller, then be the judge and cut them into halves rather than quarters. Now I specifically got these large shrimp with the shells on because I want those shells, but we have to remove them and the intestinal tract. So I just take a kitchen shear, enter it through this little hole at the end, and then just cut through, peel that shell off, and check for the intestinal tract. Save that shell, check for the intestinal tract. This one didn't have one, but I know the rest will. If you find one, just pull it out and wipe it on a towel. And once all the shrimp are deshelled, we're just gonna cut those into little bite-sized pieces as well. Depending on the size of the shrimp, we could probably cut them into 3 to 4 little pieces. So now I've got my cubed scallops, my cubed shrimp, and my shrimp shells. We're gonna add these back into the refrigerator until we need to use them. Now we can drain our spinach. Then dry it in a salad spinner. And you hear this crisp? That's just better quality spinach. We still have some more mise en place to take care of. There's a lot going on, so I know there's a lot of preparation, but that's gonna make throwing it all together so damn easy. I need like 2-3 cloves of garlic for the pasta, 2-3 cloves of garlic for the spinach, and 1 for the Bronzino. I'm just gonna go ahead and chop them all at the same time. Then we need about a 1/4 cup of finely chopped fresh parsley, so I'm just gonna rip a handful and give that a mince. And then a few very thin slices of some fresh lemon. So now we've got some of our mise en place ready for garnishes. And now we can start to bread and fry the arancini. First thing I gotta do, get a pot of oil hot. I've got some oil here. I've used it a couple times. I always recycle my fry oil at least 3 times. I'm also gonna get a big pot, fill it up with water. It's gonna take a minute to get hot. So I'm gonna get those guys going on the stove. I'm also gonna set the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So now while that's heating up, set up our 3-stage breading station for the risotto. First up, a little all-purpose flour, maybe a cup. Then 2 eggs beaten very well, otherwise it won't coat the risotto pieces very well. 1 cup of Italian seasoned breadcrumbs and 1 cup of panko, and add salt to all those dishes. Then we can pull out our molded risotto. We wanna just clean up all the edges so it's a nice square piece, and then we go through and cut 1.5 by 2 inch pieces. Then we want to get those pieces into the flour, get them coated on all sides, dust off the excess, then into the egg, make sure it's well coated in the egg and you've drained the excess, and then into the breadcrumbs. Gently work those breadcrumbs in. You don't want the pieces to fall apart, but you want them well breaded. Then once the oil is up to a frying temp, we're ready to go. I want it at 350, but I preheat it to 360 just because I know dropping them in the oil will cool it down a bit. I fry in batches of 4 to 5 at a time. Once I drop them, I see if the oil has dropped at all. If it hasn't, I'll lower the temperature. Let those cook for about 3 to 5 minutes until they're golden brown on all sides. Then pull them out, drain them on a wire rack, season with salt, and add the next batch. If the temperatures drop, pump the heat back up. And then go through and fry the rest of the pieces. You should end up with about 20 of them. I found this new product for dealing with hot oil. All you do is simply turn the heat off, pour a couple packets into the oil, stir it around, let it cool, and the next day it'll solidify into this gelatin that you can easily just throw away. It's pretty cool. And there we have perfect little fried arancini that we can now top with the tuna and the salmon. I want to take the piping bag. I want to measure where I'm going to cut them about the same width as the risotto pieces. And then I'm going to go ahead with the tuna. I'm going to pipe the tuna on about half of the pieces of the arancini and the salmon on the other half. Plate it up real nice on a serving platter or whatever you're going to do. Garnish with a little bit of those scallions. And you've got a stunner of a first course ready to serve for your 7 fishes. It's fantastic. Now we've got most things prepped. Everything's gonna start to come together really quickly. I'm gonna just get my sauce started. So I'm gonna turn these 2 24-ounce cans of whole peeled tomatoes into a passata with my food mill. I use about a half cup of water to clean out the cans, but not too much because we're just gonna eventually have to reduce that out of the sauce. So now our sauce is prepped. We're gonna simultaneously prep the Bronzino, because that can cook while our pasta's cooking. And what we're gonna need is a real ton of salt. You're gonna say this is gonna be too much salt, but trust me, you're not gonna taste this much salt. Salt is just there to basically build a cave that the whole fish will steam in. So we're gonna need 2 pounds of it. And I do recommend kosher salt for this. Specifically this brand if you can find it. It's about 2/3 of this box. And then to that, I'm just gonna add water. You can use egg white, but why use egg white when water works just as well? And I wanna basically make it look like wet sand. And to me, there's no real recipe for this. I just add enough water until I can form the salt into somewhat of a ball. If I can't, I'll add a little bit more. But if there's any water like pooling at the bottom of the bowl, that's an indication you've gone too far. So add a little bit more salt. Once it's moist enough to sort of squeeze into a ball and begin to mold, we can go on a sheet tray and build a bed for the fish to lay on. Then we're gonna take the Bronzino, lay that right on that bed of salt. I can take those lemon slices, fill the cavity of the fish with them along with some of those garlic slices, lay it right on top of the lemon, and then a couple pieces of parsley. And that's all that we're gonna use to season it, and that's gonna be plenty of seasoning, trust me. I'm gonna start to work some of the salt on the bed up the sides of the fish to almost cradle it, and then on top of it, we can just go on with the rest of that salt, encasing the fish entirely in that salt. If you see any cracks, just sort of close them up. And once that fish is entirely covered in salt, it's ready to be thrown into the oven. And now we're straight into the home stretch. The first thing we're gonna do here is cook some breadcrumbs. So I'm gonna get a small pan on medium-high heat. I'm gonna add about 2-3 tablespoons of olive oil. And while that gets hot, I'm gonna get my seafood out for the sauce. I've got my scallops, my shrimp, and my shellfish. The shellfish cook at different times though, so I want to fish out the clams, which take the longest, and just separate those from the mussels. That oil's hot. I'm gonna go in with about a cup of breadcrumbs, mix them around, let those breadcrumbs absorb that oil, and then we can just start to toast them. After a couple minutes, I'm gonna toss in a few tablespoons of that freshly chopped parsley. I'm gonna season that with a nice pinch of salt, and then I'm just gonna toss this around, cook this until those breadcrumbs turn a darker shade of brown, keeping them moving constantly so they get nice even color. And once they're nice and crispy, I'm gonna turn the heat off, transfer those into a paper towel lined bowl, and then I want to wipe that pan clean, return it back to the stove. We're going to turn the heat back on. I'm going to add olive oil to that pan again, and then once it's hot, we're going to add those shrimp shells into the pot, and we want to toast them. Those are going to release all of those beautiful shrimp flavors, and after about 3-4 minutes of roasting them, we're going to take some of that wine, maybe a cup of it. We're going to turn the heat off and we're going to deglaze that pan with that wine. We're going to reduce that by half, and then I'm going to add maybe another half cup of water to the pan, and then I want to reduce that by half to basically just form a nice shrimp stock that we're going to use to make our tomato sauce. So once that's up to a simmer, I'm going to push that off to the side burner, and then I'm going to get started on the sauce in a large Dutch oven. I'm going to get that hot and the bottom of the Dutch oven coated in oil, and then I'm going to add a whole bunch of garlic, reserving some for the spinach we need to cook in a little bit. Now we want to toast that garlic. We want to slightly brown it. Browned garlic and seafood go together really, really well. Once we start to see browning around the edges, I'm going to hit it with some red pepper flake, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that shrimp stock and I'm going to run that through a fine mesh strainer right into the pot. That's going to be the deglazing liquid. So I want to take that and I want to reduce that by half again. Once I can see most of that liquid is reduced, then I can go in and add the tomatoes. I'm going to hit it with a little lemon juice. I'm going to squeeze in about a quarter of a lemon, a little bit of salt, bring it up to a boil, and then down to a simmer. We have some of that water in there that we need to reduce out, especially because I know the seafood will release some of its own juices, thinning the sauce back out. So you kind of want to thicken it before it thins back out from those juices. Now the water's boiling, we can season it with some salt, but don't go too crazy because there's a lot of salt with the seafood. And the sauce is also reduced. So at this point, we're ready to throw the Bronzino into the oven. That's gonna take 20 minutes to cook. I'm gonna set a timer for that and use that timer to time out my pasta. I've got Bucatini here. It's gonna take 9 minutes to cook, but the clams take the longest to cook. They take about 10-11 minutes to cook. So I wanna throw those into the sauce before I drop the pasta and give those about a minute or two head start. Get them into the sauce, stir them around, and then immediately cover to let them start cooking. At this point, we can drop the Bucatini into the boiling water, stir it up, and after the clams have cooked for about 4 or 5 minutes, then we can add the mussels in. They cook a lot quicker. Get them mixed in, and then again, throw the lid back on. About 2 or 3 minutes after you added the mussels, you can go in and add the scallops. Again, mix them into the sauce, throw that lid back on, and then with only about a minute and a half remaining, that's gonna be the perfect amount of time for those little bites of shrimp to just sort of steep and become perfectly cooked and tender in that sauce. So drop the shrimp, get the lid back on, and at this point, we're at about 8 or 9 minutes with the Bucatini, and I find sometimes that'll cook in 8 minutes. So make sure you keep tasting the pasta until it's properly cooked, and reserve some pasta water just in case we need it. And we wanna drain that pasta in the sink in a strainer, and then return the pasta right back into that big pot. By now we can take a look at our seafood and everything looks pretty good. The clams have opened up. We're gonna marry the sauce with the pasta right now. Now I can see there's still a few clams that haven't opened yet, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add the sauce and all the seafood, clams, and mussels that have opened right into the pasta. Stir it all together, and if there's any clams that haven't opened, I'm gonna leave them in the pot with a little bit of sauce to continue to cook. With a wooden spoon, just mix the pasta with the sauce, add a little pasta water if needed, and toss in a whole bunch of fresh basil, and the pasta should be ready to serve. But I want to keep it nice and hot while we cook the spinach. In a high-rimmed pan, I'm gonna get it on medium-high heat. I'm gonna coat the bottom of the pan in some oil, and I'm gonna add the rest of the garlic that we've got. And again, I'm gonna cook that garlic until it becomes nice and browned. That brown changes the aroma of the garlic into something a little bit more complex and delicious, and it goes great with spinach. Once that garlic is nicely browned, we're gonna take about all that spinach we can fit into a pan, and I'm gonna take a spatula, and like a smash burger, I'm gonna smash that spinach into the pan, and that heat of the pan is gonna release release the moisture in that spinach and quickly evaporate it off. This should cook very quickly, almost like you're blanching it, but instead of blanching it, we're pan roasting it. We're getting that garlic and oil flavor. And once we begin to see the spinach wilt, we want to hit it with salt. We want to shut the heat off and get them out of the pan. Now for plating for the pasta, I'm going to get a big old serving bowl, family style, and pour all that pasta straight into the bowl. Then I'm going to take all the cooked clams and the excess sauce that's left in the pot and just pour it straight on top. And by now the Bronzino is fully cooked. I'm going to take it out of the pan and let it rest while we finish plating the pasta. On top of the pasta, we're going to go with a nice amount of those breadcrumbs along with some fresh basil leaves and some nice crusty bread to go along with it. And there you've got bucatini with seafood sauce. An incredibly satisfying primi piatti, but we're not done yet. See what happened? It's hard as a rock. And now inside, all of the steam was trapped. All the moisture is maintained. It should be one of the greatest, easiest ways to cook a fish you've ever had. So just break open that salt cave, expose that fish, and this is actually a cool way to sort of present the fish to your guests. And here you have my feast of the 7 fishes in 3 amazing dishes. Gonna plate up a little bit of pasta with some fresh basil, some bread, some cheese. If you don't like cheese on your seafood pasta, good for you. And then a little bit more breadcrumb and we can dig in. And all that seafood makes for this wonderfully sweet and delicious tomato sauce. Gotta check the doneness of everything. I'm happy with how everything's cooked. Now for the main event. We want to carefully shove away any of that salt from the sides of the fish and then transfer that fish out of that salt onto a fresh sheet tray. We didn't want to accidentally pull any of that salt onto the flesh of the fish. The skin of the fish should pull right off real easily. And then you want to take your fork and just cut down along the length of the body in the middle to split those 2 fillets on the top side. And then you can sort of just start to pull each fillet off of the bones. But the fish will be so delicate and so perfectly cooked that you're just going to want to be very gentle trying to transfer this from the body of the fish to a plate. The first fillet, I got a little bit of bone stuck in there. Second fillet pulled off with no bones. So transfer those over to the plate and just run your hands through the fillets and double check that there are no little bones hidden in the flesh of the fish. You really don't want to serve or eat those. Once the top fillets are pulled off, the spine should come right out along with the head and should reveal those bottom fillets. Just go ahead and pick out any bones you can see, and then just like the top, scoop out the fillets onto a plate. And I mean, these things are just insanely moist and juicy. This cooking method is a foolproof way to perfection. Onto a plate, each person's plate is gonna get about 1 of these full fillets, along with a nice scoop of that sauteed spinach. And to garnish the fish, we're gonna add a little bit of really good extra virgin olive oil and a little bit of flaky sea salt. It does need a little bit of salt, believe it or not. And here you've got our segundi, and the only word to describe it is spectacular. What's amazing besides how moist it is that the flavors, the lemon, the garlic, and the parsley, that's able to come through in each bite. It's so flavorful, you wouldn't even believe it. And to end it all with a beautiful dish like this, I mean, come on. I hope you give this one a try. It's gonna be in my holiday plan of attack, like all of my holiday recipes. It's a digital download. We'll have a book next year, hopefully, but the link to grab the download is gonna be down in the description. Thank you so much for watching. That's all that I have today. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and go feed yourself. Looking for another show-stopping recipe for Christmas? Then check out this agnolotti di plin filled with short rib, a surefire hit on Christmas. Link's gonna be up on the screen along with a few others. Thank you so much for watching.